Is it working?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So again, I talked about this before, but the test is it's 40 multiple choice questions, and then there's 4 essay. You have to do 2. There's none of the short answer ones, except for I want to make it so that people get slightly different tests if they don't take it at the same time as everybody else. So if you aren't at class tomorrow, you only have 1 essay, but then you have to do the short ones instead, right? So, because otherwise I know what's going to happen is some people that miss will say, hey, what were the terms in the short essay? And then they just tell them that, and that's not really fair to everybody that was there, okay? So, of the essay questions, like I said, there's 4, 1 from each chapter. One of the essays has to do with structure and functions of bureaucracies. So that's largely a macro perspective, from a functionalist perspective. So that's chapter 5. Chapter 6, the essay asks you to explain one of the required readings and analyze sexuality through the lens of one of the required readings. Basically say if you disagree or agree with it. So essentially, if you didn't do those readings, the packets that I handed you out, you won't be able to do the essay on sexuality. Okay? Chapter 7 is on deviance. The essay for chapter 7 has to do with how society responds to deviance. So again, the essay for that is specific ways that society responds to deviance, especially through like the legal system. And then the last one has to do with stratification. So it basically has to do with kind of the class debate we had, like who should you blame for stratification and why. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's pretty much it. So you would choose 2 of those, right? So each one of those is worth 30 points, and then the 40 multiple choice questions, that part will be Scantron, okay?
So there's 4 to choose from, 4 essays?
Yep, and you choose 2.
What was the first one?
The first one was structure and functions of bureaucracies. Okay. Is everybody clear on the essays then? Did you hear that? Okay. So then, this one I would say, compared to some of the other tests, has a few more statistics on it, but not a whole bunch, because we're dealing with like stratification, sexuality, so there's some numbers that are referenced in that. Compared to the last test, there aren't as many people. There's not as many people to identify, but there are a few, okay? So for example, who is the guy that's most associated with bureaucracies? Who's the guy that's like the classic theorist with bureaucracies? It's got a German name. Looks like it should be pronounced one way, but it's really
Weber.
Weber. Yep. Kind of like Vader, but so Max Weber, and he came up with what? Well, he came up with a lot. Yeah, he came up with a lot of stuff, but one of the main things he did was the 6 elements of bureaucracies. Yep. So that was. Is Weber's analysis more of a micro level or a macro level analysis? Macro, because it's larger. Okay. There was another theorist that studied small group structure, and whenever he's looking at small groups, that'd be more of a micro analysis, right? Like an SI analysis. One of the terms that he talked about was the difference between primary and secondary groups. So, what's a primary group?
Primary group does more of like emotional support, like a family, he said.
Right, family.
Like a close group of friends.
If you have like your baseball team, you're really, really close to them, and you grew up and you guys continue to hang out, like real close friends, that would be a primary group. Then the other type's a secondary group. What's that like?
Like an organization.
Yeah, like a group that gets together mostly to fulfill a task, to try to do something. So over time, those groups can change into primary groups, but they start out with a focus on trying to accomplish a task. So like your workplace, right? I started out 7 years ago teaching at West Fargo High School. I don't know anybody. That's a secondary group. Now it's becoming a little bit of both, right? Because I hang out with a lot of them. If I had a problem, like something traumatic happened, I'd call to talk to get support from them. You know, Mr. Cozy's wife died this summer. Like me and Mr. Holder are over there talking to him. So it functions as both a secondary and primary group. Okay. So who's the guy that came up with that concept?
Is it Robert Merton?
No, but that was a good guess. Merton's a theorist. The guy's name's Charles Horton Cooley, or C.H. Cooley. Okay? C.H. Cooley, yep. Another one of the things that we talked about in class was types of group leadership. Types of group leadership. So there's kind of three main types that they discussed. Somebody tell me what those are.
Expressive.
Expressive?
Which is caring about, instead of trying to get one goal accomplished, you care about the well-being of your people.
Right, so expressive leadership is focused on support and like emotionally supporting the people. And
Kind of like in Japan. Would that be like something in Japan?
Maybe, I don't know. It depends on the type of group in Japan, I would guess. But
And then instrumental, which is more focused on getting stuff done, whatever it means.
right, instrumental is focused on getting stuff done. Good. And then there's one other type.
Authoritarian.
Well, they did talk about authoritarian too. I guess I'm thinking of one other type. Authoritarian is somebody that doesn't seek too much feedback from the members, right? But if you have a type of leader where they don't do anything, they just kind of are there, but they let everybody, laissez-faire. So that has an economic, they borrow that term from economic concept. Okay, there were two main guys that did research with group conformity. One studied, he had a study where people looked at lines and tried to determine which one was longer than the other or which one matched. And then there was another theorist that studied fake electric shocks, okay? So in both of those studies they had deception involved, where really the person, it wasn't the person getting shocked or it wasn't all of the people being studied, it was just one person. So in the case of the shock test, who was the researcher?
Milgram.
Yeah, the Stanley Milgram study, okay? Somebody describe that to me a little bit.
It was a study where they had to see how many people would follow authority if someone was pushing them to kill someone, basically.
Right, or harm somebody. So Milgram had family that were Jewish. He himself was Jewish. I can't remember if it was his parents or grandparents or who. But so when they had the Nuremberg trials after World War II, all of the people that they asked, why did you do this? They all said, we were following orders. So Milgram was curious as to what kind of pressure experts or authority figures exert on individuals. So he had people come in and there were people hooked up to this fake shock machine and he wanted to see how far they would push it. Okay? So what was the one with the line study? Somebody describe that.
You had three different, obviously differently length lines, and they would have a group of people that would all say the wrong answer, and then the person that they were testing would say an answer, and they would see if the person would follow the group, because the group would say the wrong answer.
Right, so what are they testing there?
Conformity with the group.
Conformity, yeah, and the pressure that groups exert on individuals to conform. Right. So, what was the name of the researcher that carried out that?
Ash.
Yeah, Solomon Ash. Yeah, so it's A-S-C-H. Good. Okay, if you're like walking in the mall and you see like your baseball team and then Fargo South's baseball team is walking around, you and your team would be an example of what type of group? An in-group or an out-group?
In-group.
In-group, whereas the Fargo South would be an example of out-group, the out-group. Good. figure out how I'm gonna flip pages without camera seeing, right? There we go. Okay. Some of these questions are kind of hard to reword.
You can just read them off.
Yeah, I know.
Probably just tell us what the letter
Okay.
is to the
When you look at the study of norms of sexuality across the world, is there kind of a standard from society to society, or is there a lot of difference?
There's a lot of difference.
Okay, so explain some of the differences then.
Like here, you can't marry a 12-year-old girl when you're like 34, but in other places you can.
Okay, what else? What's another difference?
We don't force our women to marry certain men. Like the dad doesn't decide who a woman's gonna marry here.
Okay, for the most part, we don't have arranged marriages. What else?
polygamy is not encouraged here.
Okay, polygamy is illegal in most instances here. Good. Anything else?
Our country is more open to like activities compared to some countries where like you might not even be allowed to kiss.
Right. So if you were in the classic example is Middle Eastern countries. If you were in a Middle Eastern country and did what some of the people do in the hallway at West Fargo High School, they'd probably, at very least, put you in jail. In some instances, they might like beat you physically. Okay. Anything else?
The way you dress. Like here, a lot of people dress provocatively, but in like Middle Eastern countries, they're all completely covered.
Right. Are there other places that are more? Are there other places that are more open than we are?
Yes.
Probably France.
Okay. Yeah, it's quite a few European countries. Okay. All right. How about within the United States now? Is there a lot of diversity in sexual beliefs or practices in the United States? Yeah, that's true. Okay. In terms of activity in the United States, what are some things that we talked about? Like, when do people, the average person, start becoming active? How much activity do they have? Which groups of people are the most active, etc. What are some other stats that we talked about with that?
Active in what, like sex? Or
Yeah.
what?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I guess I should have specified that. I just assumed you.
That was actually kind of what we thought, but we thought maybe like moving.
Lifting weights and stuff. No, there's a Lauman study, right? So what did they talk about in the Lauman study?
Well, most people become sexually active when they're a senior in high school or something.
Right? So by the end of high school, more than half of the people have become sexually active, defined as having intercourse at least one time. Okay? What else?
Isn't it like most people have at least like 6 partners throughout their life? Was it 6 or was it less?
I don't remember that, and that tells you that you don't have to know it.
Okay,
What else?
Bless you. Bless you.
Did you say that there was like about 50%?
Yeah, by the end of high school. Okay. How about this? What about married versus single people?
What about them?
What trends in terms of sexual activity do we see between married versus single people?
Married people have more sex.
Huh?
Married people have more sex.
Yep, married people have sex more frequently.
Split into like 10 sections. Like 30% like 2 or 1 or something. Like another 30%.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point too. In the Lauman study, they said there was a great amount of diversity in sexual activity. They take the average married person versus the average single person. The average married person has more sex than the average single person. Okay? And they also, the average married person also, they did a survey about, they asked people how satisfied with your level of sexual activity and the quality of it, basically, like how good it is. And married people said that it was better than single people. So, that's the media says, the messages that the media send, I think, are the opposite, right? The media sends messages that like, oh, single people are having it the best all the time, I think, right?
You can taste me! I don't want to!
Okay. Okay. Let's see.